Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth episode of this multi-cloud video series on VMware Aria suite of products and solutions. My name is Satya Shrestha, a senior staff multi-cloud solutions architect here at VMware, and I'm joined by Sajal Debnath, who is a staff customer success architect at VMware. Welcome back to the show, Sajal, and how have you been, mate?
Thank you so much. I've been good. What about you?
I'm doing good, man. So far, so good.
Good.
So Sajal, tell us, what are we going to do today in this fourth episode?
So today we are going to focus on Aria automation and then specifically the configuration portion. So you got your Aria automation ready, be it on premises or SaaS version. Then what do you do then? So that is the starting point. You start configuring the product to make it cloud ready or build a cloud solution.
Yeah.
We are going to talk about that today.
Can you actually quickly show you the architecture diagram of what we're showing and how the whole environment looks like?
Definitely. So if you remember last a few of the sessions, we talked about the lab that we have. So this is the SaaS version of the lab that you are, as an user, you log into VMware SaaS solutions through a browser and then go to Aria SaaS solutions and you have the different endpoints. Now, the difference between the on-premises and the SaaS version is for a SaaS version, you need a cloud proxy. So cloud proxy to the specific environment and all the traffic or the talk between the SaaS version and the endpoints happens through the cloud proxy.
Okay, so the cloud proxy, is it like an appliance that we have to deploy?
Yes, you will have to deploy an appliance in that specific environment. And then if you notice there, for any public clouds, you don't need a cloud proxy. That's a REST API based communication that happens between the SaaS version and the public clouds. So this is what it looks. And also, if you remember, we talked about tagging in the previous session, right? So we mentioned that this is the tags that we're going to utilize as and when we go. So we would have endpoint mentioned as like AWS GCP or VMC on AWS or on premises. And then environment is we will talk about when we talk about cloud zone, what environment it is.
If I could quickly summarize, is when we have to chat with our vCenter NSXT on, for example, VMC on AWS or GCVE or Azure VMware solution, we have to go through a cloud proxy. So we need to have that appliance on each of this environment individually. And if we are to do the same thing and start communicating with other cloud environment, public cloud environments like AWS, Azure, and Google, we don't need any cloud proxy there. They can just talk directly through API. Is that right?
Right. That's absolutely right.
Okay. Thank you.
And then if you are building it everything on premises, that means everything is within your data center. Then you don't need cloud proxy. You would replace that with the appliance of the solution itself. So Aria automation solutions. Okay?
Right.
So once it's deployed, assuming that it's deployed in your environment or you have the access to SaaS version, what do you do next? So you log into your environment, and then there are three areas that you configure. You configure the connections. That means your resources from which you are going to get the resources or deploy your virtual machines. And then there are specific areas that you can do. So you add your cloud accounts, like where you want to deploy your environments. And then for consumptions, you configure those certain points. What cloud zones, flavor mapping, image, network profiles, storage profiles, etc. And then you configure your projects. And we will talk about more of these when you go into it. But remember this sequence, and then this is for your basic starting point. You can go into advanced points, which we will go, but this is bare minimum you need to start with.
Okay.
After this, you have advanced configurations. Under those, again, configure and administration groups. You have various aspects to configure, but then these are not mandatory. These are add-on services that you can configure, add-on features that you can configure, which we will show. And once this configuration is done, there is another configuration that you can do, which is extensibility. And then if you have time today, we will talk about extensibility or push it for the next session.
Yep, sounds good.
This is all we are going to cover today.
All right. So we're going to go straight to demo now?
Yep.
Let's do that.
Straight move to the demo portion. So this is what the SaaS version looks like. Today we're going to talk about the SaaS version. Once you log into the console, you have various options to choose from. You just click on Aria Automation and then launch service. Once you log into it, there are three different areas that you can choose from. One is assembler, pipelines, and service broker. Those are different services, but as a cloud admin, you are logging into the Aria Automation console and then configuring everything at the back end. Your end users will log into service broker and then consume services from here. But then as an admin, you will go to assembler.
Got it. Assembler is for admin, user, service broker is for the consumers or users, right?
Yes, consumers and users. I mean, as an admin, you would still configure things in the service broker, but then it's assumed that your end users who don't have any admin rights, they will consume the resources or services from the service broker. And then, as you can see that as you log into Assembler, you have a couple of tabs: resources, design, infrastructure, extensibility, alerts, and migration. As the name suggests, those are the things that it does. So we will first start with infrastructure because that's where you configure your infrastructure.
Yep.
So the moment you click on infrastructure, you see on the left-hand side, you have a couple of areas: administration, configure, onboarding, resources, activity, and connections.
Yep.
Right? So we will always start with connections. This is where you configure your cloud accounts.
Got it.
In the sense, your end resources, points from which you will consume the resources and deploy your virtual machines.
Yep.
And as you can see, there are a couple of things that I have already configured. You can click on add cloud account, and the options that you have is AWS, GCP, Azure. These are native cloud services.
Right.
And NSXT manager or vCenter server. Those are the two endpoints. NSXV is still for the backward compatibility.
Right.
Notice that something special for VMware Cloud on AWS because this is maintained and managed by VMware to have a special integration. So difference being, if I come here, it can automatically select the SDDC that you have.
Right.
Yep. And then you can, since it's already activated, if it's not activated, it will be activated for you automatically. You don't have to configure much here.
Right. So that VMC and AWS SDDC that I see there, MCA VMC demo SDDC, that is automatically detected because it is part of this account. Is that right?
Yes. So with this account, I have the VMC SDDC and Aria Automation.
Yep.
So that is the reason I can manually configure it.
Yep. Okay. So if I have to add additional SDDC, which is not part of this account, this is the step we should do, manual?
So if you have additional SDDCs, that would come here as well. But in any time, you can go ahead and manually add it.
Okay. Okay.
So if you have multiple SDDCs, it will come under this list.
Got it. Okay.
Right? Yeah. And then if something is not working, you can always manually configure it, give it a name, it will pull up the information. One interesting thing, you see the IP address and then NSX manager, it's automatically populated for you.
Right. Right.
So that is interesting, right? For other two, if I have a vCenter server in, say, GCVE or AVS, I will actually have to manually add the vCenter server and manually add NSXT manager.
All right. So they will be added as vCenter server or NSXT manager. That
it's like any other endpoint. Like, for example, this is my AVS vCenter.
Yeah.
So I had to configure it using a cloud proxy. And then username and password, and then you provide the configuration. It's like adding any other vCenter server.
Got it. Now, in terms of cloud proxy deployment, because you have already done it, for a new user who is to deploy the cloud proxy, what is the steps there?
Yeah, I'm making sure that. But before that one point, I do have a VROPS cloud account or Aria Operations cloud account under my account here, organization here. And since that vCenter server, the AVS vCenter server is configured with that, it automatically comes up here.
All right.
So that provides, didn't have to configure much. That has a lot of benefits.
Yeah, so because it was already connected to VROPS account here, the Aria automation here automatically selected that or detected that as well, right?
Yes. Okay. Yes. And then for the NSX manager, again, I'll have to get it done manually. So the configurations, it says that what cloud account is attached with this NSX manager. I'll have to pick it up. I can add, when I click on add, it shows all of the vCenter servers. So you'll have to pick up which vCenter server is managed by this NSXT endpoint. Right? And then remember the tags that I have used throughout. As I mentioned, the tags that I'll be using, I have configured the tags consistently according to all the endpoints.
Okay.
Now, coming back to cloud proxies, you can add the cloud proxies here, come to the cloud proxies tab and say new, and then you can download the OVA and deploy it in the vCenter server, or you can copy link and then from the link you can deploy the
OVA
proxy. In the vCenter server. One interesting thing, once you deploy the OVA, it would ask for this key, one-time key. That's how it pairs between the SaaS version and the cloud proxy. It knows that, okay, this is the cloud proxy I'm pairing with. So once it's deployed, it would run up here. And then it would tell you what are the services that it's running under. Like right now, it's the services that it's running is assembler and then Aria operations for logs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So, and then you click on this proxy, you get to see the details of the different options that it has, what it's running, what it's not running, and all of that. So that's how. And then the updation and upgradation of the cloud proxies are managed centrally from here.
Right.
Right? So that is all about cloud accounts. You need to configure the cloud accounts for you to be able to consume the resources from any endpoint. It can be any vCenter server, your on-premises data center, something in the cloud like GCP, AWS, or VMware on AWS, but it's like configuring any vCenter server.
Yeah.
Right? Apart from that, there is something else that you can configure, which is integrations. These are add-on integrations. For example, this is my Aria operations lab. So this is integrated, and then it's getting pricing informations, and then what are the vCenter server that is managed by all this Aria instance, operations instance. It will tell you all of that. But the interesting part is it goes beyond. You can directly integrate with Active Directory, and then it is a native integration. So you don't have to have any other plugins or anything. Whenever you create a machine, it can create a machine into Active Directory in the computers and then delete it from there, all of that. So this is native integration. This is really interesting. You can have native integration with Ansible, Ansible tar, and then cost, extensibility on premises. If you have on-premises environment, that is the Aria orchestrator.
Yep.
You have integrations with GitHub, GitLab, external IPAM. So the networking that you configure here is you have native capabilities or NSXT. You can use that as an endpoint, and or you can utilize external IPAMs.
Okay.
And then definitely Puppet. Red Hat OpenShift is interesting addition. Tanzu Mission Control, if you want to configure and consume Kubernetes resources, it can be Tanzu Mission Control or Enterprise PKS or OpenShift. So it has native integrations for all of that. Right? So that is part of it. And once you configure that, if you just quickly, we will configure that Kubernetes. We'll talk about that later on. We had three areas, major areas: connections, and then configure, and then administration. Now, connection is where you plug into the endpoints. So three different areas. Now you got your endpoints. You can see all the vCenter server resources. How do you consume them? The consumption portion is configured under configuration. This configure portion. And then administration is, I have my resources ready. How do I give permissions to end users to consume those resources? So these two distinct areas. One is configuring the resources, and the other one is consumption of the resources. So configuration is done here under configure portion. Consumption is done under administration. So let's start with the configure. And the other interesting part is when you add the cloud accounts under resource tab, you'd be able to see all the computes, the networks, all the things that are configured in that environment.
Okay, so it will automatically pull all those data as soon as we do the connection. Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
So it shows, like for network, it will show you other ranges if you have configured. What are the IP addresses? If you have IP addresses leased and then load balancers configured, it would show all the load balancers and the network domains if you have network domains configured. So all that information can be seen. And then the other interesting part is security configurations. So these are all coming from AWS, and then there are other endpoints that it has. Same thing goes for storage. We will talk about these two, supervisors and Kubernetes, in a later portion. Okay. Let's first look at, so we configure cloud account endpoints. And then we'll come to cloud zone. It's where I define what are the resources I want to configure. For example, this is again AVS vCenter, the vCenter that is in Azure. And it shows you like what are the CPU that is available to me, my memory, storage, and what are the projects, all of that information, capacity consumption, as per demand based. It shows this nice information. And then summary portion, actually, this is where I configure. I choose the account, you give it a name, placement policy, and then folder, which folder. So this is what is like placement policy. I have default. Bin pack is you deploy everything in the first ESXi host, then move to the other one. That's how you fill up one host, then move to the other host. That way deployment would happen. Spread by, in the sense, you could try to distribute load into all the hosts in that particular cluster. Spread by memory, same thing, but then it considers the memory workload. Advanced is something which considers the external VROPs. If you have Aria operations configured with the vCenter server, it asks operations, where should I deploy this workload? And then this is helpful if you have multiple clusters and then you want to distribute the workload between those clusters. Right? This folder is to choose if you want to deploy under a specific folder. So in that vCenter server, whatever resources that you would create, it would go under all that folder. But if I choose one folder here, anything that I deploy would go into that folder. If I want to deploy based on projects, so there is other ways that you can define my folder so that machines related to a particular project will go to under different folders. And then you define the capability tags. This is where the capability tags comes.
Yeah.
Once you do that, you'll be able to see the available clusters. And then there are options. You can include all unassigned computes or dynamically include compute based by tags. And this is very important in the sense, if your infrastructure resources, infrastructure admins, if you specifically add more clusters, you define the tagging mechanism. Say, tag this cluster with this tag. The moment it's tagged, it's discovered here in Aria Automation. It would come under this list and it will be consumed. So you don't have to configure anything, or you can manually select. Right? You can manually select which one you want to select. So that's how it works. So if you have a pretty dynamic environment, you add more resources, remove resources, have one which is dynamically by tags. If it's pretty static, you can simply select, manually select. Right? The next two would show where that particular resource is utilized, and then if there are any alerts, it will come up here.
Got it.
That's how you would configure a cloud zone. So new cloud zone, again, to start with, you can select any one of the endpoints, give it a name, give the placement policy. You can select a specific folder where you want to deploy, give it a capability name that you want to give, and then go to compute. You select this or dynamically select based by tags. If there are any tags, you can select by those. And then projects, you don't have to select anything. Once it's tagged with a project, it comes up here. So that's how you configure a cloud zone. Okay. So that is the first step. Next is you'll have to configure flavor. It's like t-shirting your environment, t-shirt sizes. So you can define, say, small, medium, large, or as per your requirement. And then when you define a flavor, you define what the CPU or the memory that you want to give. And in case of native cloud, you just select the size that you want. For example, AWS, I have T2 small, and then Azure has basic _ A0, F1 micro for GCP. So you can have one flavor and then map to all the endpoints that you have.
Yeah, and usually these are similar kind of configuration on each cloud, right?
Yeah, I mean, it can vary. There's no restriction. It's just that for better management of your environment, it should be consistent across environment. Like if I'm saying small in my AWS vCenter should be similar to small in GCP. Correct, if that meaning of small varies between clouds, then it will become hard for you to maintain and manage across. So it should be consistent. It's the best practice, I would say.
What I was about to say was, for example, in this example, we have T2 small coming from AWS environment because they call it T2 small, and in Azure there's basic A0. So these are the virtual machine types or EC2 instance types if it's AWS, right? Azure VM type if it's Azure. That is actually coming directly from Azure or AWS or Google GCP.
Right.
So we'll actually bring the same form factor here, isn't it?
Yes. So it's like if I want to deploy in AWS, what the form factor that I need to choose? Because Aria Automation is the orchestration layer. So it's going to automate your deployment. But the resource is getting deployed in AWS or Azure or GCP, right? So I need to choose something that AWS understands.
Yes.
It understands its own sizing. So that's the reason.
Absolutely. Got it.
But when I am doing this vCenter deployment, I am choosing the size of them, like how much CPU and how much memory I want to give.
So you can be very, very granular in those vCenters. Yep.
Right. And then same thing, like for example, different sizes for native environment. And then I defined my own large, what large means to me in these environments. So that is the purpose of flavor, because while deploying how much CPU memory, while defining the template, I can define a custom CPU memory there. But then if you have this, this is specifically, in general, majority of the times I should be utilizing this. It's to make your life easier, not to make it more complex.
Exactly.
Right? The next thing is image. You said, okay, I need a VM which is 1 CPU, 1 GB. What operating system is going to be installed in it, or what template it's going to utilize to deploy that. So for example, I have these, say, Alpine Linux and then Ubuntu or Windows 2019. So for example, if I go ahead with this, say, Alpine. So this is what I had in my local environment. I have templates deployed in this. AWS provides Alpine. Unfortunately, Azure and GCP had Ubuntu. I just chose Ubuntu server because it was easier. I don't think that Alpine was available in one of these environments.
Yeah.
That worked for me. So you can give it any name, and then images. You remember that images that are, when I'm talking about native clouds,
Yes,
it's coming from those images. So it's not something that I give. It's something that I'm pulling in from those native environments.
correct. So these are the images that are currently available in those native cloud environments, and those are the ones that we can use here, right?
Right.
Makes sense.
And then this is my vCenter server, so my GCP environments.
I can see their GCVE, AVS, VMC, and AWS, and also on-prem environment. So all of these images, you have uploaded them in the content library. Is that in the content library?
So I can get it from content library or normal image as well. So
okay,
either ways it could work.
So this system can detect those LVA files and then just present it here. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, got it.
Right. So if I have any, what I need to do, I need to create a template in the vCenter server and then keep it as is or upload it to the content library. That way, it's much easier for me to maintain the images across multiple vCenter servers.
Correct.
It would say recognize all of them. So, for example, if I come up with new images and then say region is my MCA, and then I search for images, it would bring up all the images that is available in that environment.
All right.
So these are native templates that is there without outside of content library. Yep. Some of them are under content libraries. You see all of these, and then you can show all, and then you can see all of the details of them.
Yep.
Right. So this is how you can pull up the image. It's just to I've mentioned that once this VM is deployed in that endpoint, what template is going to utilize for that deployment. Yeah. Okay. So we got our t-shirt sizing, we got our image mapping. Then we need to come to network. What network would it utilize? Yeah. So I can, for example, select this way. Okay. I select the region or the endpoint and then give it a name, give it a capability tag, and then we choose the network. You can choose the network from normal switch or normal port group, distributed port group, or this is all coming from NSXT. See, these are NSXT segments. Yeah. I can choose NSXT segments, right? And then once you choose one of the NSXT segments, you can manage the IP range in there. You can manage it from here or let the external environment manage the networks. But otherwise, you can choose an IP range that this internal and external is being utilized via the internal IP mechanism, IP assignment mechanism, or you can choose external network from an external IPAM integration. Remember those IPAM integrations, so you have an external IPAM. Yes. And you have it integrated. So you can utilize that for the IP management. Yeah. If the IPAM was configured there, we will see it there, right? You got it. Yep. Yep. And then you can give it a name and then add a network, or you can manage the start and IP addresses, all of that. So that's really what, this is really interesting. And then this is, configuring consumption of the network port groups or the segments. The other interesting thing is you can actually utilize on-demand network. So if you have NSXT in there, you can utilize on-demand network. That means you define it, and then at the deployment time, the networks would be deployed for you. So you choose your, transport zone. You choose your external network. You choose your tier. Serial logic, say, for example, I'm just selecting this, just selecting random things too. And then tier 0 logical router, and then select the edge cluster. And then IP address management, you can use CIDR, internal or external again. You can utilize address IP block to define subnet blocks, all of that. But this network doesn't exist now. When you deploy a VM and say use this on-demand network, it's going to utilize that network and then configure it in the NSXT, and then it's going to be configured. Okay. That is the beauty of it. You can decide what is good, and then same thing for security. You can define your security. When you define your template, you define, okay, this is the security exactly it's going to be. This is a lockdown environment. I'm deploying an application, end-to-end application, right? Between these two components, this is the port that needs to be opened. Everything else is locked in. So I don't have to pre-configure or after deployment, reach out to the networking team saying, hey, can you please do this for me? I can, as an application architect, I can configure everything here. The moment end user deploys that application, network, security, everything is going to be configured for them.
Yeah.
Same thing for load balancer. You can, if you have added load balancer, you can select the load balancer, and then at the deployment time, you can consume the load balancers. That is the beauty and flexibility of it.
Yeah.
And those security groups, you can consume the security groups as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that is network profile. There's a lot that you can do for the consumptions, but let's just configure the basic points. Otherwise, it will be too much for the first thing. So I just say this and then choose a network.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned the CIDR. So if you click on that, you can define the domain, you can provide the CIDR, default gateway, DNS server, search domain, all of that. Whether it supports public IP, whether it's default for the zone, you can define all of that for that network. And then you can manage the IP ranges, right?
Yep.
The last point that you need to configure is storage. That machine should be deployed where?
Yep.
And then say, for example, AVS vCenter. Let's pick out that because consistently we have been doing that. So you need to configure new storage profile. You give it, select the region, give it a name, give the disk type, whether standard disk or first class disk, and then what the storage policy. You can define the storage policies. If you have vSAN into that environment, you can define the storage policy or select data store default, and then select the data store cluster. That's as simple as that. Okay?
Yep.
You can define the provisioning type like clean, take, eager, zero take. You can choose that. Even you can define the shares, limit the IOPS that you can limit, that you can define, and then disk mode. If you want the encryption, you can mention whether it supports encryption or not, and then you can mention whether it's a preferred storage for this region. So you can define all of that, or you can simply define basic things to start with. Like for example, if you can click here, I just gave everything by default and then mention this.
Yep.
So once you do these, your configuration portion is done. Basic configuration, not the advanced one.
Yep.
Next, what you need to do is define a project. Yeah. So once you create a project, it will show you all the information. But then, say, for example, I create a new project. I give it a name. I define the users that will be part of this project. I can add users. I can search here. I can assign a role, administrator, or just a member, or viewer, or supervisor. It's very clearly mentioned what each user does.
Yep.
Right. And then I can add groups as well. The same thing. The roles are administrator for this project only. The member, the viewer, the supervisor. Right.
Right.
And then the provisioning. You need to add the zone, cloud zones that you have, and then you can define the placement policy here. Remember, we selected the placement policy here, or we can select the placement policy here. You can define the tags. You can define the constraints here, or you can define the constraints in design. We talked about that in tagging section, right?
Yes.
That where we define the constraints. And then if you want to define any custom properties for the deployed resources. And then you can also define a custom naming here. And then request timeout, and then cloud zone mapping for template Terraform resources. If you have a Terraform configured, you can define your mapping here. So let's have a look at the configured one. So for example, this is my project. There are 2 users that's part of this.
Yep.
For the provisioning, I have all the cloud zones here. Placement policy is spread, and then there's no constraint defined here. Custom naming, I'm taking this. So whenever something is deployed, it would have the project name, the username, and there's a number that would go. So if you have this, you are good to go.
Right.
You can now define a template and then start deploying your resources.
Right. So these are the basic foundation to start deploying the templates, right?
Right. Basic foundations.
Yep.
Right. And then that's configured the basic one. So now another thing is Kubernetes. Now you see the Kubernetes portion. One thing is that if you have the supervisor cluster, that means your vSphere environment has the Kubernetes native Kubernetes capability. So it would automatically come up here. You can add a Kubernetes cluster for an environment, and then it will show you the list of supervisor clusters. There's no more because I have already used the one that's there. So if I click on there, it would show me the account, the supervisor cluster, the address, and the namespaces that is there.
Mhm.
Right? I can go into the namespace and then see the details of the resources and the users and the resource limits that there, or I can define my resource limits.
Yeah.
Or I can come here under the supervisor cluster and then add supervisor cluster or add a namespace here. So I can
Mhm.
add a new supervisor namespace, give it a name, and then select the account and then select the project for which that supervisor namespace would be added.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right?
Yep.
So that's what I can do from here native. And then when defining the zones, I can define a Kubernetes zone as well.
Mhm.
I have the provisioning, right? And then which project it can consume resources from. The other things are users and groups. If you define custom roles, by default, the roles that you have seen,
Mhm.
you can define your custom roles as well. If those are not sufficient to you, you can define your own custom roles, a test, and then give what are the roles that you want to give. It can go to very granular level. So you can define those roles and
Mhm.
then assign those to the users. And the other
Yep.
thing is custom names. Now, here's one thing, custom names by default, at the first, there's been no custom name enrollment. So you need to enroll first. And you can migrate your custom naming template from any project. So for example, I'm enrolling it here. It's
Mhm.
done. Now I can define a custom naming template.
Yeah.
So it can scope can be the entire organization or a project. You give a new naming template. You can select all of this resource type and apply to them, and then template format, and then starting counter value, increment value step. And then the other thing is you can validate the compute name for uniqueness. That means
Mhm.
if you are not contradicting. Right? And then there are advanced matching patterns and all of that. You can do a lot of things. And this is very helpful. You can always click on the tips and you see the tips.
This is like a naming convention, for example, for compute for virtual machine name or network name. Is that
Yeah.
right? We define the naming
Yes.
convention. Mm.
Yes.
It's like dev instance or prod instance or test instance, things
Yeah.
like that.
So how do you identify the VMs, like where it came from? What is the origin? So naming convention, any organization will have their standard naming convention for the deployed
Correct.
resources. This
Yes.
is where you can define your naming convention, and then you can assign the projects for which those particular templates apply. So you
Right.
have project to project defined naming convention. You can define
Correct.
all of that and consume it. The other interesting thing is secrets. You can define new secret. Say new secret. This is where you can define your password, secret password, if you want to utilize it across different areas. So you can
Mhm.
define your password, say something, and then this is encrypted. So it's stored, and you can just simply use the secret in your templates.
Mhm.
That's what secrets are for. And then setting these are new additions, newer additions, where you can create a new resource. What it does for the new, this is very interesting. You can gives the end users to deploy virtual machines, simple virtual machines without anything defining anything. So I can simply allow to create new resource. And then while we cover service broker, we'll cover that, how they can simply deploy a virtual machine utilizing those options. You don't have to define a template here. You don't even have to define a template here.
Okay.
And the other one is IP release timeout. If the IPs are assigned, what's the release timeout? So
Yeah.
that's the two settings you can configure. And
Mhm.
I think this should be good for today. We can
Yeah.
talk about extensibility and template in the next session.
So can we quickly see, whatever we have discussed here and deploying a template?
So deploying a template is when you design a template, that's when you would define a template,
Yeah.
deploy a template. So for example, base app.
Mhm.
So I just defined a single virtual machine. This is
Yeah.
a very basic template. I have only a virtual machine and network.
Mm.
On the right hand side, you can see that I can choose from all these endpoints because I have all those endpoints. I can
Mm.
simply choose the endpoint, select the VM name, and then by default, it selects the network. You can see that based on the input that I have selected, I can see what image that is going to utilize, what flavor it's going to utilize,
Mhm.
what's the resource group name based on the input, the
Mhm.
network that it's going to select, and then see network, it's going to select this network, but the constraint is depending on the input environment.
Mm. Mhm.
So based on AWS, it's going to go to the AWS network or likewise, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then for the storage, there was not much options. So I don't have to select a storage. By default, it's going to go there.
Yep.
And then I am configuring some things within the VM post deployment. So there is something kind of cloud config that's I'm configuring. But we will talk about that in details while we configure the templates.
Okay.
But
Okay.
then this is going to go into the endpoint. So if I test it, so VMC on AWS, say test VM, and then I'm not sure whether it's going to do it right now or not, but that would bring up an interesting point.
So this should be
It's
deploying to VMs and AWS. If it is successful, we should see a virtual machine and a network there, right?
So this is I'm testing. It's not doing actual deployment. It's
right.
just testing whether I can deploy it or not.
Okay. Okay. If the deployment will succeed or not. Okay.
That's the good part. The best part is instead of doing the deployment, it takes 5-10 minutes. I can simply test it out and then go to the provisioning diagram to see the logical flow of deployment, where my configuration was correct or not. So you see the network allocation. It showed me what network it chose for each and every environment. But most importantly, machine allocation, it will tell you, okay, what was the request? What is the constraint? So this project had all these endpoints, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 endpoints. It will tell you which one it chose and why. You see two side-by-side regions. You see the flavors were available, image were available, but cloud zone was not available because the hard constraint was environment VMC on AWS, which was not a match because this environment was AVS. So there was unmatched constraints. That's why this was not chosen. This was chosen. Within that, host was selected. Once you configure everything, you flow a logical path, right? By coming here, you would be and testing it, you would be able to see where that logical path is followed or something problematic is there. So troubleshooting is very easy.
Yeah, so this is basically validating it prior to deployment and see if the deployment succeed or fail, right? And if it's clean here, it succeeds, then we can go ahead and deploy, right?
Right. So it will show you this information for testing and actual deployment as well.
Right.
For actual deployment also, you can see this. And this is basic information. If you go to dev mode, you can see really detailed deployment or information. You can export it and troubleshoot it as well.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So in our next video, we will be creating a template with whatever configurations we have made there, and then we will do the deployment and see the actual deployment, right?
Right. So in the next video, we will talk about extensibility and then go to template design.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good.
So with that, thank you everyone for your time and watching this video. I hope this was useful to you, and thank you, Satya, for having me here.
Thank you, Sajal. Excellent demonstration today. And like Sajal said, we all thank you very much for your time today. And we hope that you find this video useful. On our 5th episode, we'll be coming back again to demonstrate you more on creating a template, deploying it in different cloud environments. Now with that, we will call it a wrap for this video, and we look forward to seeing you again in our next video. Have a good one, everyone, and bye for now.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.